The Grand Hall of the Black Wind Alliance lay submerged in the cold glow of blue torches. At the center of the obsidian chamber, a martial ancestor expert knelt in chains, his robe soaked in blood, his breathing ragged and uneven. He belonged to the Crimson Lac Hall, a subsidiary branch that had served under Black Wind for over a century. Yet last night Crimson Lac Hall was erased within a single watch of the night. No war drums. No survivors. The report was read aloud before the assembled elders. The ones responsible were Azure Cloud Pavilion, a young merchant guild long dismissed as insignificant on the city's outskirts. The air froze. Destroying a branch was not what frightened them. What was terrifying was daring to do so while fully aware that Black Wind Alliance stood behind it. The prisoner lifted his head and let out a hoarse laugh. They said, "This is only the beginning." The words fell like a blade across the hall. The Grand Elder tightened his grip on the stone armrest. He understood if they failed to suppress this immediately, Black Wind's prestige would crumble. But if they responded with overwhelming force, the delicate balance among the merchant alliances would shatter. A minor guild had stepped onto the board, and this board had never shown mercy to the weak. While the Black Wind Alliance debated whether to strike back or preserve the fragile balance of power, the eastern inner city remained lit through the night at Azure Cloud Pavilion. Inside, a grand hall lined with maps of trade routes, Su Luo Yi stood before 23 representatives of affiliated merchant guilds. The atmosphere was no less heavy than that of Black Wind's council chamber. Everyone understood that the fall of Crimson Lac Hall meant Azure Cloud had stepped fully into the open and painted a target on its own back. An elderly shopkeeper spoke with a trembling voice. "Guildmaster, Black Wind will not let this go." Su Luoyi did not answer. Her gaze shifted slightly toward the gray-robed man standing beside a wooden chessboard. Shen Qi, the one who had proposed the surprise assault on Crimson Lac Hall. The one who claimed that if they did not strike first, Azure Cloud would be devoured piece by piece. The question was no longer whether it had been right or wrong. The question was, this Azure Cloud was far too small to withstand a full reckoning from the Black Wind Alliance. Either they would be crushed in a single blow, or they would have to transform immediately into a force that could not be easily erased. And the price of that choice would not be small. After the closed-door meeting, Azure Cloud Pavilion had no path of retreat. At Shen Qi's proposal, the first order was issued. All 23 affiliated guilds were to relocate their personnel, warehouses, and ledgers into Azure Cloud's inner city compound within 3 days. Trade routes were narrowed. City gates reinforced. Escort teams merged under a single chain of command. Several shopkeepers objected. Concentrating their forces, they argued, would only make Azure Cloud a clearer, easier target. Shen Qi merely rested his hand on the chessboard. "Scattered we die. If we want to survive, we stand as one." At the same time, a covenant of mutual accord was enacted, publicly framed as a pledge to share life and death alike. Yet those who signed felt a faint current of spiritual energy seep quietly into their meridians. Within a single night, the 7 most hesitant guilds abruptly changed their stance. 2 of the loudest dissenters vanished from the city. Azure Cloud transformed from a loose coalition of merchants into a sealed block of steel. And elsewhere in the city, someone had begun to realize, this show of rigidity was not an act of desperation. It was the opening move of a game that had been calculated long in advance. 3 days after Azure Cloud sealed its gates, an unsigned letter arrived at the gates of the Heavenly Mechanism sect. The recipient was Lu Changqing. The young prodigy of strategy immediately sensed something unusual. A minor merchant guild could not consolidate its forces with such precision in so short a time if driven only by fear. This was not instinctive defense, it was a battle formation prepared in advance. He secretly ordered the capture of a shopkeeper who had recently signed the Covenant of Mutual Accord. But when a spellcaster attempted to break the seal, the formation did not collapse. Instead, 8 glowing characters flared across the man's back in spiritual light. "Do you dare to meet me?" Lu Changqing stilled. This was not defense. It was an invitation. That very day he sent an invitation of his own, requesting Shen Qi's presence at Gathering Cloud Tower, the tallest structure in the city, and the clearest vantage point over the entire board. What was meant to be a cautious probe became an open duel of wits. After only a few exchanges tested through tea and subtle currents of spiritual force, Lu Changqing realized something that sent a chill down his spine. Azure Cloud was not trying to survive. They were deliberately pulling him onto the board. The meeting at Gathering Cloud Tower had not yet concluded when dire news arrived. The Black Wind Alliance formally issued a public censure against Azure Cloud Pavilion before the entire merchant coalition. Worse still, 2 neutral powers announced their support for disciplinary measures to preserve order. It was a soft death sentence: isolation, sealed trade routes, strangled supply lines. Inside Azure Cloud's inner city, emergency inventories began at once. Storehouses were counted and recounted. The shopkeeper's composure faltered. Su Luo Yi stared at the trade map as red markings spread across it, each line representing a lifeline severed one by one. At Gathering Cloud Tower, Lu Changqing fell silent. He understood the stakes. If he openly aided Azure Cloud, the Heavenly Mechanism sect would be dragged into direct confrontation with Black Wind. But if he refused the secret Shen Qi had just revealed about his elder brother, that could surface at any moment. Shen Qi did not press him. He simply asked, "Do you wish to preserve neutrality? Or preserve control?" For the first time, Lu Changqing felt the board slipping from his grasp. An azure cloud so recently fortified now stood on the brink of suffocation before the true battle had even begun. Within 2 days the blockade was fully enforced. Azure Cloud's merchant ships were detained at 3 major ports. The Northern Raw Materials Depot was sealed under the pretext of a tax inspection. Partners who had once signed binding contracts now sent letters requesting delays in trade. The city of Azure Cloud began to feel the shortage. Goods thinned, prices fluctuated, confidence wavered. In the Grand Hall, a shopkeeper fell to his knees. "Guildmaster, perhaps we should hand over a few people as an offering. Consider it restitution." The words cut through the room like a blade, severing what little faith remained. Su Luoyi said nothing, but the steadiness in her eyes had dimmed. At the same time, news arrived from Gathering Cloud Tower. The Heavenly Mechanism sect had not openly sided with Black Wind, but neither had they offered any support. Lu Changqing had chosen silence. Azure Cloud stood completely isolated. Night fell. The grain reserves would last only 10 days. If Black Wind advanced even one military step further, the unified defenses they had built would become a cage of their own making. For the first time since the game began, Shen Qi issued no new command. The board seemed to close in. On the 3rd night of the blockade, just as panic began to spread through the inner city, Shen Qi finally reappeared in the main hall. He did not speak of grain supplies. Nor did he mention defenses. Instead, he placed a dossier on the table. The people of Crimson Lac Hall were never entirely under Black Wind's control. Su Luoyi froze. Shen Qi continued for years. Crimson Lac Hall had secretly traded with a certain faction within the Heavenly Mechanism sect. If this truth were exposed, Black Wind would realize they had been wielded as a blade used to settle another's hidden score. At the same time, news spread across the city. Merchant vessels belonging to the Heavenly Mechanism sect, in the Western District, were suddenly subjected to intense inspections over suspected collusion. Lu Changqing understood at once. Shen Qi was not asking for his help. He was making every player on the board doubt one another. The lesson was unmistakable. In a balance of power game, the most dangerous figure is not the strongest one, but the one who makes trust collapse between all sides. If Heavenly Mechanism remained silent now, they would be the next to stand isolated. This time, Lu Changqing had no choice but to decide. On the morning of the 5th day, just as the Black Wind Alliance prepared to announce its final sanctions, the situation shifted without warning. News rippled through the merchant coalition. A trade convoy affiliated with the Heavenly Mechanism sect was under investigation for suspicious ties to Crimson Lac Hall. At the same time, several neutral elders began openly questioning the true origins of this so-called purge. Black Wind suddenly realized if they continued pressing Azure Cloud to the brink, they might be turning themselves into a pawn in someone else's design. At that precise moment, a guard force bearing the insignia of Heavenly Mechanism appeared outside Azure Cloud's outer district, citing the need to maintain trade route stability. They declared no alliance, offered no open support, but their presence alone was enough to halt any military advance from Black Wind. The blockade eased piece by piece. The sanctions were postponed indefinitely. Inside Azure Cloud's main hall, Su Luoyi finally exhaled. Shen Qi merely gazed at the wooden chessboard in silence. He had not won through strength. He had won by forcing his opponents to doubt themselves. Yet, in a distant corner of the merchant coalition, an old elder murmured softly, "This method is not that of an unknown." The board was calm again. But a greater game had only just begun.